locked in this cage, treated like some animal.
It's like totally removing someone from society.
I don't understand how someone can subject another human being to this type of punishment and think that it's justified.
Hatred, frustration.
Totally
Everybody's walking over
and
he's shouting from the bottom of that hole, but nobody hears him.
Screaming, all these
and it's dark
emotions
down there.
while you're
It just drives you crazy.
You will be held in solitary confinement until further notice.
The first attempt at solitary confinement in the United States was in 1829. The prison was called Easton State Penitentiary. The belief behind isolation was that confining someone for a long enough time could free their good soul. Easton State truly believed that they were trying to rehabilitate their prisoners. Charles Dickens visited Easton State Penitentiary. He was shocked at the conditions that the prisoners were in. Dickens wrote, "Why does he stare at his hands and pick open flesh?" Charles Dickens and many others believed this was cruel. Easton State shut down in 1913, but it was too late. Over 300 other prisons had picked up the practice of prisoner isolation. Easton State Penitentiary is now a museum. Alcatraz was the first supermax prison, which are prisons for the most dangerous criminals. All of the cells on Alcatraz were terrible, but the worst were the cells known as the dark cells. This was because very little light could get in, due to the fact that there were two doors to enter the room. The outer door was solid with a shutter glass slot so that guards could look in on the prisoners, and the inner one had tow-resistant steel bars with a slot for food to be shoved in. Alcatraz cost too much to maintain, and eventually, in 1963, it closed.
What reasons did you go into solitary confinement?
Breaking rules, disobeying direct orders was quite often, and battery.
In the 1980s, the solitary confinement block at Pelican Bay was built. This block is considered the toughest housing unit in California. Prisoners have little to no contact with anyone else. The cells are opened from a remote control, and the food is pushed in through a slot in the door. The doors are perforated, which allow small light streams in the cell. That's the only light they get. The inmates get 1 hour to work out in a cemented cell room. The solitary confinement cells at Pelican Bay became known as the SHU, standing for Solitary Housing Unit. In the 1990s, the building boom of Supermax or Control Unit prison begins, basing the prisons on Pelican Bay. Oregon, Indiana, Mississippi, Virginia, Ohio, Wisconsin, and other states all build freestanding isolation units. In 1999, a report from the Department of Justice finds that more than 30 states are operating Supermax-type prisons. Numerous studies have documented the harmful psychology effects of long-term solitary confinement, which can produce debilitating symptoms such as visual and auditory hallucinations, hypersensitivity to noise and touch, insomnia, paranoia, uncontrollable feeling of rage and fear, disorientation of time and perception, increased risks of suicide, and post-traumatic stress disorder. These effects are magnified for two particular vulnerable populations, juveniles and the mentally ill. These two populations take up 1/3 of all prisoners in isolation. In early July 2013, there was a hunger strike started by a group of prisoners from Pelican Bay. It was a strike to get a 5-year limit on solitary confinement, and it had over 30,000 California prisoner participants. The strike helped get restrictions on solitary confinement and ended after 60 days. In recent years, there have been many cases about solitary confinement. A recent federal law makes it harder for prisoners to be put in solitary confinement, particularly for prisoners who were recently pregnant, women who are pregnant, minors, and the disabled.
In your knowledge, did solitary confinement change at all from when you were first in prison to when you left?
Yes, it changed. They used to be able to put us in solitary confinement for anything, and now it's become much more difficult because of the Supreme Court. Yes, solitary confinement most definitely changed me.
How did it change you?
How I deal with my emotions. I have a lot more anxiety than I used to. But in some ways it changed me for the better. I'm semi-well-read and did a lot of push-ups.
Though there are many good steps forward, solitary confinement is still abused. On April 24, 2017, inmate Terrell Thomas died in Milwaukee jail after being deprived of water for 7 days. Terrell was arrested on April 15, 2016 on charges that he shot a man and after fired 2 gunshots inside the Milwaukee Hotel and Casino. He was later placed in isolation cell at Milwaukee County Jail, with no mattress, blanket, or pillow, where he was served Nutriloaf but no drinks. Mr. Thomas could not advocate for himself because he was dealing with a mental health crisis with his bipolar disorder. Officers treated his mental illness like a behavioral problem. So the question remains, what is a more humane punishment for prisoners who misbehave?
A step-down program, something that monitors the person's behavior. You still go to solitary, but you get like group activities with other prisoners, much more yard, and then it can only be for 90 days to 30 days at max.